In the early months of the year,
Of Metro Toronto, Ab Campbell.
I asked the viewers of this channel if you would ever consider buying a condo over 25 years old. To my surprise, 60% of you said no, and I'm going to try to change your mind in today's video. Welcome back. My name is Tom Storey. I make educational real estate videos. If you learned anything new today, all I ask is hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you want to book a call with me and my team, you can do so in the first link in the description. There's a narrative out there, specifically here for the city of Toronto, that there's an expiry date for condos. And I've talked about it a little bit on the podcast channel as well, where at a period of time, maybe it makes sense to sell that condo to get into freehold ownership. But I also think kind of unfairly, a lot of potential investors or end users are writing off these older buildings, and I actually think they're better. I would say I have a bit of a unique perspective to this because we get to help people buy and sell condos all the time. And you'd think that if maintenance fees are higher, if they're more expensive, if buildings are older, those condos would take longer to sell. But in my experience, especially the last 5 years, even if the prices are higher, the monthly maintenance fees are higher, these older buildings actually sell faster. And I think I know why, but I want to break it down in today's video. Let's go over the pros and cons of buying in an old condominium in the city of Toronto. So let's start on the positive side of things. Let's talk about the pros. The first one would be, I just think they are better floor plans and they are more functional. These buildings were not sold to investors. These buildings, a lot of them were sold to end users. They built floor plans that people actually wanted to live in and raise a family in. And not only do I think that they are much more functional floor plans for the most part, but they are also larger spaces. These were the days where a 2-bedroom unit meant like minimum 1,000 square feet. Some of these brand new 2-bedroom condos today, they're somehow jamming 2 bedrooms into like 550 square feet. I guess technically it's a 2-bedroom, but not compared to these older buildings. Pro number 2 is I think the quality of the building is better. Yes, from the outside, these might be brick buildings. Maybe they're not glass. Maybe they don't look so glamorous. But in terms of hearing what your neighbors are having for dinner, it's just not going to happen in these older buildings. I think the actual quality of the builds are better than a lot of the new projects. And that's just not my opinion. I've heard that from many, many people. Pro number 3 is that they are much more owner occupied. And that goes back to what I talked about with the floor plans. These older buildings didn't come to the market during the condo boom or the investor boom that we saw here in the city of Toronto. So that there's a good percentage of these buildings that are owner occupied compared to being rented out. And I'll clarify this because I get a comment like this in a lot of these videos. I'm not saying that buildings that have a bunch of renters is a bad thing. I'm not saying rent is bad. What I'm saying is that if you own something, just typically human behavior, you tend to treat it better than something that you would rent. And over a long period of time, if you have a group of people that own an asset versus renting an asset, just the chances that the building is better maintained over that period of time are higher if there's more owners in the building. And in my opinion, these owner-occupied buildings for the next 10, 20, 30 years just have better longevity and will be held to a higher standard. The next pro, but it could also be a con, is the amenities. And the reason that I say that is because they typically have really great amenities. The buildings where you had several buildings in a row have massive areas, but if these amenities haven't been updated in a period of time, they might look a little bit tired. But in some of these older buildings, the amenities they have are just phenomenal. Then we have to talk about the front desk. So I'm just going to tell you this from personal experience. I've shown a lot of older buildings. I've lived in an older building. I've lived in a newer building. I've seen different concierges in different buildings. In my experience, these older buildings are just better run. The front desk person actually knows your name, wants to have a conversation with you. And I'm not saying that as a blanket statement that this couldn't happen in a new building as well. But what I've seen in these new buildings is that typically these new companies come in, you got people at the front desk and maybe they last 4 to 6 months. But some of these older buildings, people have been working there for 5 or 10 years. Next up is the reserve fund. So when you buy a condominium, you review something called a status certificate. It tells you many, many things you want to know. And one of those things is how much money is in the reserve fund. Now, these older buildings usually have a very, very healthy reserve fund, which takes me to the next pro, is that if there's any kinks that need to be worked out in the building, they've likely already happened. So I know at some point with these older buildings, there's going to be big repairs that need to happen, but they have massive reserve funds from being around for 20, 30 years. And a lot of people are worried about, well, what if I get this massive special assessment? I just don't think it's as likely as some people think with these older buildings. The next pro is that they cost less per square foot. You get more property for less price, and who doesn't love that? And lastly, for the pro side of things, and this is maybe one of the most important factors, These buildings are the best located. Why are they the best located? Because they were built before anything else. These were the first condos that were in the downtown core. So they're right near the water. They're right on Bay Street. They're right at very big intersections because they were the first to be built. I think that's something that not a lot of people talk about, but is very, very true. Now let's talk about the cons. Now the biggest pushback I'm going to get in the comments, if you didn't actually watch to this part and you just started commenting, is, Tom, the maintenance fees in these older buildings are way higher. And I don't actually know if I agree with that. So we look at maintenance as a cost per square foot. So how many square feet is the unit and what does it cost? And I'd say you'd like to see maintenance fees in the 80 to 85 cents range, but some of these older buildings are over $1 per square foot. And on top of that, they're larger units, so these maintenance fees can be $1,200, $1,300. But here's the thing, if you actually break it down, a lot of these older buildings, included in that maintenance fee is everything. Hydro, water, some even include basic cable and internet depending on the building. And it's kind of interesting to me, like I see these new buildings launched to the market and within 5 years, their maintenance fees per square foot are not that much different from buildings that are 25 years old. So the statement I made at the beginning of this is that some condos have an expiry date. I'd say maybe that's true for buildings that are not well run, that are 80 to 90% rented out. Something could go wrong eventually and they might not be great investments. But these older, well-built, well-located buildings that are well managed, I think will stand the test of time and always be in some level of demand. But there are some very real cons that we have to consider. If you just want something new, like these buildings aren't going to be for you, right? Sometimes the hallways, the lobby can look a little bit tired and dated because it is if it hasn't been renovated. Now, slowly they are renovating the amenities in the hallways and front desk and things like that in these buildings, but not all of them have gotten to that point yet. So if you want to walk into something and feel like it's brand new, well, then these buildings just aren't going to be for you. Another potential con for these older buildings is that a lot of these buildings are the buildings that have bylaws in the condo documents that have very specific rules on pets. Most newer buildings do not have as strict rules on pets, but these older buildings do. So it's very common for me to see in these older buildings straight up no pets allowed, or maybe one cat, or you can have a dog, but it has to be under 25 pounds. They are very, very strict on pet restrictions. And when these older buildings were built, a lot of them didn't have balconies. They were kind of like built-in balconies, right? These sunrooms, these solariums. So if you really want to have a balcony, well, these buildings don't always have that for you. And in some of the original ones that were built, you might not actually have in-suite laundry. So if that's an absolute deal breaker for you, then okay, buy something a little bit newer. And finally, a con about these buildings. If you are buying in one of these buildings as an investor and not an end user, well, they're under rent control. Now that might be a pro or a con depending on what way you want to look at it, but that is something I think is important to know. Just off the top of my head, like the Harbor Square condos are awesome. 460, 480 Queens Quay, the King's Landing building downtown. You got Polo Club 1, Polo Club 2 on Bay Street. That's 1055 Bay and 44 St. Joseph. If you want me to put together a list of the best older buildings in Toronto, I will be happy to do that or even make a video on it for you. But I'd love to know your opinion. After watching this video, did I sway you either direction? Would you buy a condo that's over 25 years old in the city of Toronto? Let me know. My name's Tom Storey. Thank you for watching. And remember, home is where your story begins.